Good afternoon, folks. In Ukraine, the contradictions between the AFU and Zelensky's LGBT cocaine gang seem to have reached a breaking point, and an explosive denouement is about to occur. The leadership is deliberately putting the armed forces under attack. And the leadership of the AFU is forced to carry out ridiculous orders. We all saw the result in Mariupol. And it is not in favor of Ukraine. Soldiers and even fighters of neo-Nazi gangs are not just used as cannon fodder, they are deliberately sent to slaughter. Also, as we know, participants of the so-called territorial defense are now sent to the front lines. That is, people without training, sometimes not even skilled in handling weapons. Their fate is not difficult to predict. As the saying goes, you can't go wrong. Ukraine constantly receives aid from the West. Does anyone in the AFU see it? These billions are simply stolen. Did anyone in the West naively believe that the money sent to the thieves to wage war would be used for its intended purpose? For 30 years, Ukraine has been embezzling everything, including international loans, and now suddenly they are going to be honest. The result was half-starved soldiers dressed in rags and without medical care. What are they fighting for? For independence? Ukraine was sold out to the United States long ago. Except for the scumbags from the National Security Forces, those fighting on the Ukrainian side see the truth. They see the destruction of civilians in Donbass and beyond. For what? For the new billions of LGBT cocaine gangs? And if one of the Ukrainian soldiers dies, will his family receive the promised 15 million hryvnias? That is almost $500,000. Does anybody believe this? They will not receive a cent, and the bodies of the dead will be thrown into a common pit and hastily covered with earth. And this is at best. Often the bodies are simply thrown into an open field. More and more Ukrainians are beginning to realize this. And the incantation, "Glory to Ukraine," now only impresses complete idiots. It begs the question, since it is clearly not just a series of mistakes, but a planned strategy, why would the LGBT cocaine junta want this? I lived in Kiev for almost 5 years, and I was acquainted with a few politicians. I have some information. Who provoked the situation in Donbass? Let's think logically. The SBU offices were working both in Donetsk-Lugansk. Were they unaware of people's opinions? They were. Why didn't they do anything? In general, everything started peacefully. There were few protests. If the junta in Kiev considered them separatists and traitors, then why weren't they all detained at the first stage? The answer is simple. The Kiev junta needed a conflict. It was a military conflict, a bloodbath, where, under the cries of "Glory to Ukraine," men of reproductive age would voluntarily go to destruction. Thus, two problems are solved. There is no one to Maidan anymore. And the second problem is perspective, the destruction of the Ukrainian people, the cleansing of the territory from such. And for the speedy disposal of the elderly and other burdening the budget citizens, Uliana Suprun was appointed the Minister of Health, Doctor of Death. And the Ukrainian idol was, of course, supplemented by pensions, on which it is simply impossible to live. Everything was played out like clockwork. And the last game should be played by Zelensky. That is why even the scumbags in Ukraine began to see the light. More and more often there are calls to distrust Zelensky and even to bloody reprisals against him. How will it end? It is hard to say. The cocaine puppet suits his masters very well. And nobody cares about the opinion of the Ukrainians. Will the people in the mortally wounded country be able to tear down the corrupt junta? I think they will not go beyond screaming. And if they do bring down the government, what then? The Makhnovshchina? The Seven Boyar regime? And in the bloodiest, most radical form, because the neo-Nazis are expected to come to power. Now I often hear accusations against Zelensky. How could it be? He called himself a servant of the people. Has he deceived people? Did he ever once say that he was a servant of the Ukrainian people? Friends, thank you for your attention. All the best to you. This is UVAROV. I will see you again soon, and we will talk. As always, frankly.